Welcome back, Sebastian here. Time for my power rankings for the 2024 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. So obviously a little bit delayed, but very busy weekend. So race review got delayed by a day, and this will also has also been delayed by a day. But anyway, getting right into it. So starting with number 20, a really rough weekend for this driver, arguably his worst race in years, and that is Fernando Alonso. For Alonso, qualified last for the Grand Prix, out-qualified by Stroll by 0.4 of a second. Obviously a very scrappy qualifying session. First, one of the two laps went out in the gravel. That obviously had a big effect on things. And then second lap, not able to get out of Q1. Race wasn't much better, wasn't really able to make much ground, and basically ended up being classified pretty much dead last. So yeah, overall really rough weekend for Alonso. Number 19, I have Logan Sargent. So for Sargent, qualifying pretty poor again. Both of his lap times were deleted, so he wasn't able to set a lap time that was within track limits. So that's obviously a big problem. The race, not really a whole lot to talk about. Was in the race, finished in the bottom 4 or 5 positions. Didn't really see a whole lot of him elsewhere. Number 18, this is something I worried about, coming into this weekend. The first race in Europe. This was a driver who struggled a lot in Europe last year, and unfortunately the first race was more of the same for Sergio Perez. So for Perez, out-qualified, out-raced by his teammate Max Verstappen. That in itself isn't that big of a deal, but the reality is knocked out in Q2 while his teammate took pole position, and then in the Grand Prix didn't make up that many positions. So finished behind both Mercedes, finished behind both McLarens, finished behind both Ferraris as well. So for Perez, a tough race, almost lapped by his teammate as well, so that was definitely not great, and he's definitely going to want to have a big improvement next time out in Monaco. Number 17, I have Pierre Gasly. Gasly out-qualified and out-raced by his teammate Esteban Ocon. Other than that, not a whole lot to add. Was in the lower midfield for qualifying, was in the lower midfield for the race. Not much more to say. Number 16, I have Alex Albon. So for Albon, out-qualified his teammate Logan Sargent, made it into Q2, which I think is a decent result for the Williams. In the race, was quite unfortunate to have that issue with the wheel nut. Basically had to do an entire lap with a wheel that wasn't properly attached, and that basically ruined his entire race, and he was basically a lap down within the first quarter of the race. So from there, not a whole lot to do, and then the team basically decided to retire the car early to save parts. Number 15, I've gone with Valtteri Bottas. Out-qualified his teammate Joe, but still in the race not so good. I think strategy was a bit compromised, pitted a bit too early for the hard tires, and then basically by the end of the race fell off massively and was overtaken by quite a few cars on a track where it was very difficult to overtake, which really I think speaks volumes to how worn those tires were at the end of the race. Not a terrible weekend for Bottas, but not a great weekend either. Now, number 14, I'm going to put Bottas' teammate, Zhou Guanyu. So for Zhou, out-qualified for Bottas, so not great in that respect. Hasn't out-qualified Bottas yet this year, but the race I think was alright. Finished a handful of positions ahead of his teammate, and I think, executed a better strategy in the Grand Prix compared to his teammates. So that's why overall I put him ahead of Bottas. Number 13, I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo. So for Ricciardo, out-qualified by his teammate Yuki Tsunoda and beaten in the race. So for Ricciardo, another tough weekend. Basically all throughout the weekend, Tsunoda looked like his teammate Tsunoda was doing a great job, especially on one lap pace in the practice sessions and in qualifying. But for Ricciardo, just a couple of tenths, 3-4 tenths even at points off of his teammate, never really able to extract the same amount of pace from the car as his teammate. In the race, not much better, beaten on strategy by Perez and a handful of other drivers as well. So all in all, not a great weekend for Ricciardo. Number 12, I'm going to go with Kevin Magnussen. For Magnussen, qualifying was a bit of a write-off, out-qualified by a second by his teammate Nico Hülkenberg. But that being said, he was impeded on his final flying run in Q1 by Oscar Piastri, which almost certainly contributed to the vast majority of that time loss compared to his teammate. So in that respect, I'm not too worried about the time loss compared to Hülkenberg. And then in the Grand Prix had a really good fight back and was able to move his way back up to 12th place from 18th on the grid. So a pretty good comeback in a car that's, probably a bit better than some of these other cars, the Williams, the Sauber, but still not a fantastic car. So I thought decent result overall for Magnussen. Number 11, I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz. For Sainz, not a great weekend. Beaten in qualifying and beaten in the race by his teammate Charles Leclerc. Never really seemed to be on the same level, and beaten through strategy in the pit stops compared to Oscar Piastri, who he was fighting on track at that point. For Sainz, and at the end of the day, finished about 20 seconds or so off of his teammate Leclerc, which is a bit of a big margin, especially when he wasn't really being held up by the car in front of him. So yeah, a bit of a tough weekend again for Sainz. Number 10, I'm going to go with Esteban Ocon. Another solid weekend for the French driver. Out-qualified and out-raced his teammate Pierre Gasly. Qualified, got into Q2 again, and in the race I think fell a couple of positions, but that being said, still a decent result for Ocon. Number 9, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg. For Hülkenberg, out-qualified and out-raced his teammate Kevin Magnussen. For Hülkenberg, did a really good job of getting the car into Q3 again. And yeah, out-qualified Sergio Perez as well, so that's, I guess, a good result. In the race, I think was a bit unfortunate, along with Yuki Tsunoda, I think, and Bottas as well. I think they all pitted a bit too early, and by the end of the race, their tires, I think, were just a bit too worn. So not really an optimal strategy, especially since tire deg was, I think, a bit higher than expected all around. So all in all, I think he'll be a bit disappointed with not getting a point this weekend, despite starting in the top 10. But honestly, compared to last year, it's a great result for Haas, I think, as a team, when they can be unhappy with finishing in 11th, whereas last year they would have been elated for that same result. So, but still, good result overall. Good weekend for Hülkenberg. Number 8, I've gone with Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, out-qualified Alonso by a decent margin. Obviously, there were some circumstances surrounding that. Got knocked out in Q2, so at some point I'm like, I think Stroll could have gotten into Q3. Aston Martin had really, really strong race pace. Stroll did a really good job in that first stint of the race, extending the medium tires as long as he did, just like Magnussen. And as a result, pitted on the new hard tires and used that tire delta to his advantage. So really wondering where that pace was earlier in the season, especially in the races, because most of the time in the first 6 races, Stroll would have been one of the earliest pitters. Simply because he wasn't able to get the tires to last. But last time out in Imola, able to get the tires to work, so really, really good job there. So that being said, I do think qualifying perhaps might have been a bit more to give. But all in all, I think ninth place in a race from 13th on a grid at a track where it's difficult to overtake is definitely a pretty decent result. Now, number 7, I'm going to go with Lewis Hamilton. For Hamilton, outraced his teammate George Russell, but was out-qualified by Russell. And I'm just going to put number 6 up as well. Russell was number 6 ahead of Hamilton. And my rationale for putting Russell ahead of Hamilton is twofold. First of all, Russell out-qualified Hamilton, so beat him there. And then was basically ahead of Hamilton for the vast majority of the race. Looked like he was going to finish ahead of him, had like a 10-second buffer or so. And then basically decided very late to pit for new tires, which is a really strange strategy call. Not really sure what the rationale was for that call, but the reality is it put Russell 10 seconds behind Hamilton with 10 seconds left in the Grand Prix. So he was never going to catch him. I guess for Mercedes, perhaps they thought there was a risk of a tire failure, some kind of issue, perhaps. But still, I think Russell had a slightly better weekend than Hamilton. Now, moving into the top 5, 5th, I'm going to put Yuki Tsunoda. On one lap pace especially, I think an excellent weekend for Tsunoda. Really strong pace all through the weekend. In qualifying, was mixing it up with drivers who are in theory in much better cars, and generally looked much quicker than his teammate Ricciardo. In the Grand Prix, did lose positions, lost a couple positions at the start, lost some positions, especially the one to Stroll. Through strategy as well, but still at the end of the day picked up some points, and I think he'll be very happy with that. Number 4, I've gone with Charles Leclerc. So for Leclerc, decent result, out-qualified and outraced his teammate Carlos Sainz. I think that being said, I think he'll be a bit disappointed not to finish second. In that fight behind Max Verstappen, basically, I think he would have wanted to be right behind him in that position that Norris was in. That being said, the McLarens have had very, very strong race pace the last couple of races, so it's possible that they've leapfrogged Ferrari in that respect. That being said, on one lap pace alone, I do think that the Ferraris are struggling a little bit, and so it's hard to say whether or not that's Ferrari or whether or not that's Leclerc who isn't making the most out of the package. That being said, still a really good race for Leclerc. Now, number 3, I'm going to put Oscar Piastri. Now, for Piastri, it's a bit of a strange one, beaten by his teammate in the race, but did out-qualify Norris, and then, of course, got that grid penalty. The grid penalty was for impeding, which is one of those penalties where it's kind of a 50-50 on the driver and on the team on the radio side. So it's one of those ones where you can definitely be a bit more lenient on the driver's side. It's just like an unsafe release. But for Piastri, the qualifying was really excellent, qualifying second, and then unfortunately getting that penalty made him start 5th. And with how difficult it was to overtake, he was never going to be able to make up that much ground anyway in the race, but still was able to undercut Sainz and move up a position, which was still a result in of itself. So I thought a good weekend as well for Piastri. Now, of course, number 2, I'm going to put Piastri's teammate Lando Norris. So for Norris, out-qualified by his teammate Oscar Piastri. In the race, looked really, really strong. And as the race went along, got closer and closer to Verstappen. And by the end, was 7/10 of a second at the checkered flag. So really good result there for Norris. I think it's a combination of a couple things. We saw last year Norris had excellent race pace in comparison with the Mercedes, the Ferraris. Definitely not the Red Bull. Red Bull was kind of in a league of its own on race pace last year. But the last couple of races, especially since including China, McLaren and especially Norris has been so strong in the races. So and again, a really strong result here today. And you wonder if this was a track where overtaking was a bit easier, if Norris would have been able to have a go at Verstappen in the closing stages. But we'll never know. Now, number 1, I've gone with Max Verstappen. Really strong weekend for the Dutch driver. Out-qualified and outraced his teammate Sergio Perez. Took pole position on a weekend where going through the 3 practice sessions, it looked like Red Bull weren't even going to be on the first 2 rows at points. But Verstappen put down the lap when he needed to. An excellent result there in qualifying. And then in the race, did struggle a bit towards the end, but still under those super high pressure moments towards the end of the race when he was on a black and white flag, kept it between the lines and brought it home for another Grand Prix victory. So really hard to fault him for that. And yeah, I think overall very strong weekend for Max Verstappen. So there you go. There's my power rankings for the 2024 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, we have Monaco coming up this weekend, so that's going to be one to watch, especially on Saturday. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.